If we haven't met before, hello, I'm Roddy. I'm the Group Head of Digital Skills at Windsor Forest Colleges Group. We've got 4 colleges. We're around the Windsor area, you'll be surprised to hear. So there's Windsor, there's Stroads in Egham, Slough and Langley, and BCA, which is Berkshire College of Agriculture near Maidenhead. And I've called this the Aladdin's Lamp in an EdTech Cave because since I've been working in this job, which I began in January, and I'm still an English teacher as well. So I've got a proud foot in tech and teaching, which I find very useful. But since I started, I think this for me has been demonstratively the thing that people have been searching for in edtech for years, that every few years there's a big new thing and sometimes the wind goes out of the sails of it. But this for me feels like it actually is something really useful and transformative for teaching and learning and assessment and everything else that we are in the business of doing. So there is actually some gold to be got out of with this. And we've been very fortunate that we, from the very beginning, have had a leadership team that from our chief exec down that have been really up for us using AI. And I think that's the first thing that pings out to me is that institutions where a leader has gone, yeah, let's go for it, tend now to be reaping the rewards of sort of ferreting around with it, playing, experimenting and discovering. And then equally, some of the colleges that I've spoken to where some of the edtech pros are frustrated by having not discovered, some of these things yet, it's because somebody is nervous of it or maybe an IT team is reticent to use it. So I think that's the sort of first thing I'd pick out, actually, is that I've been very lucky that I've come into this job at a time when this has landed, but also with leadership who are up for us using it. To go back in the cave, though, away from the lamp for a second, the journey of our exploration with AI began 1 year ago. And that was, or in fact, even before that. And that was thanks to our chief exec and our strong industry links, because we're all around Heathrow, having a connection through to an airline and the CIO. They had a good chat, the sort of industry mentor. And he said, if you're not using AI, what are you doing? Because he'd managed to reduce the wait times for customer service. Some of you, having flown with various airlines, may question quite where that time went, but the great thing from his point of view was managing to repurpose the time that those people were spending from 40 minutes ferreting around in different spreadsheets and collating information and drawing it together into a response to be able to, in something like, I think, 13 minutes, respond to that same call. So then it was freeing that person up to be able to invest their time differently. And so I think that challenge from an industry partner saying, come on, get on with it, gave us the sort of initial spur into creating the first private AI in FE. And I think there were three key things that drove that. The first was we wanted it to be private. We wanted to know that this was a safe space, a sandbox to interact with student data. We also wanted to make sure it wasn't teaching the public model. We wanted to make sure we weren't feeding information into something that was training the model. As you'll discover, I'm a fan of an analogy, and the analogy for this that I've been using recently with staff is it's a bit like a parrot. I don't know if any of you have ever met an African grey, but I met one in Spain a few years ago, and it was standing on the edge of a fence just listening, and I was wanting it to talk, but it didn't talk. It just listened because it was recording our voices, and I use that as an expression of what an AI model is doing if it's training it. It's learning your vernacular, it's learning your syntax, your style, the way that a human might drop a letter when it's spelling and typing and just sounds human. And obviously that's fine if it's just an email to a pizza shop saying that you're displeased with the length of time it took them to bring your margarita, but it's not great if you've got student data. So that was the second thing that we were investigating. And the biggest one for me, I think, was making sure everyone could get hold of it. I think right at the very beginning of certainly my journey in this role as head of digital skills was there's a lot of great snazzy things out there, but they don't half cost a lot of money. And that means we're going to have to make really difficult choices about who we give them to. So do you pick the person who's very confident with tech? I've actually discovered in a lot of cases, it's not the people who are most confident with tech that are making the best use of AI or have dived in first. So that would have been a mistake. And I think also we want the admin teams, we want all the student support services teams to be able to access it rather than perhaps a head of department who's nominally the person who would have been selected. So this democratization thing of making sure everyone has access was really important to us. And this on the landscape back then, a little bit like a pinball machine or a fruit machine. The three options that were out there were obviously ChatGPT, Bard or Duet, and Copilot. And I think that was the sort of landscape as we faced it, and the costs of premium membership to those, or to try and integrate them, meant that they slightly put themselves out of reach. They didn't all back then answer the questions that we wanted, which were privacy, not training the models, and democratization. And so we came to a crossroads, which I'm sure many of you will empathise with and feel familiar with, which was, do we ban it? Do we block it and say, look, turn it off, don't let any access, let the firewall company know we don't want anyone to type chatgpt.com? Or do we put some parameters in place and try and take advantage of it? And you'll be surprised to hear, since we're talking about it today, we chose option B, which was to drive towards the sun in this image, but also to put up the bumpers, a bit like bowling. We didn't want to just sort of willy-nilly throw our chances in and student data and see what happened. Obviously, that's not a safe and secure approach. We wanted the buffers up. We wanted some warnings, some cautions, some guidance along there. And I'm calling this cautious optimism, the sort of optimism to try something new, but not to do it without any caution or gay abandon. We wanted to do it with a sort of serious consideration of some of the risks concerned, and then to try and mitigate those so that we could take advantage of this. And that led us through to creating Winnie. Winnie, so called for Windsor Forest. It's based on ChatGPT, it's safe, it's secure, and we know it's processing that information in the UK. And then the next step was to give it our policies and to give it information about our courses. So Winnie launched, and to start with, it was a soft launch. We just sort of put it on the intranet. And then over time, I announced it's here. We'd already had a lot of people interacting with it by then, but the idea was that now it was the chance to sort of properly trumpet, it's here, let's go. Now, I mentioned analogies. This is one way that I try to reassure people how AI works. So I'm going to play this video. Shout if you can't hear the sound.
Do not arouse the wrath of the great and powerful Oz.
So probably familiar with the Wizard of Oz, Toto there sneaking behind the curtain to reveal that it's not a big scary being that's got actual intelligence.
Oh, pay no attention to that man behind the curtain. The great and Oz has spoken.
Who are you?
Oh, I am the great and powerful Wizard of Oz.
I've always loved how pathetic his voice is there at the end.
Do not arouse the wrath of the...
I've watched it once. There we go. But I think it's a good way of demonstrating to people that what appears to be real, what appears to be quite scary, particularly most people's first experience of AI, I think, has probably been watching things like The Matrix, where we're pulped and fed to the machine as fodder, or perhaps a scary column inch in the newspapers. I think saying, look, I know it looks big and scary and there's fire everywhere and you think it's the end of days, but actually it's just something that spits out one word at a time. And part of that education strand is the next thing I think I'd hit on, is trying to reassure people about the way it works. It means that then when you come to the conversation of how an AI checker works and the fact it's infallible because it can't reverse engineer the way that the text was constructed, because it isn't pulling it straight out of Wikipedia or a book, but building it one word at a time, helps people understand the reason why you've not turned on GPT-0 for an entire organization. A bit like the image I've used for this with people, and you probably all remember on your phone where you go to type something in notes, for example, on a phone, and it will suggest the next word. There were games about 5-6 years ago on Facebook where it would suggest that you write a whole sentence doing this, or nominate who's the third person in your list and they're the person you're most likely to marry, or what have you. That guesswork, that next step guess, I could write a whole sentence on my phone. Once upon a time there was, and it would suggest it, but it's not pulling that information from somewhere existent. And so that's really what the Wizard of Oz was about, was setting up to people how it works. And I think that's an important step in letting people understand what it is, to reduce the fear, actually, to puncture the fear around it. And so as part of that, Winnie was launched with some education, but also some reassurance that this was a private, secure place to interact with student data, that it goes through all our usual content and monitoring filters, so that it's got an abuse monitor. In fact, there was a funny story about this early on when we were using it, when we were trying to encourage it to interact with some of our adult learners, and it spotted the word adult and went, nope, not going anywhere near that. Equally, when I was trying to encourage it to role play as Richard III, it saw the word role play, and I think it thought I was up to all sorts of nefarious activities. So again, it blocked it. It's been a learning curve. You know, there have been things along the journey that I would be lying if I didn't say were bumpy. We tried to connect ChatGPT 4, and 4, whilst very clever, doesn't work particularly well in the UK. Part of the problem of us being a bit behind the door when it comes to these things being handed out since 2016, but it doesn't work particularly well when it's attached to the policies. It gets a bit policy obsessed, and so asking it to act as William Shakespeare or Andrew Aguecheek, if you're doing Twelfth Night and you want to have a chat with it, suddenly it would go, I can't see anything in the policies about Andrew Aguecheek, and you've lost the momentum you had in that class. So there have been bumps along the way, but the great thing to let people know just to start with is give it a go if you want to do something sensitive, secure and private. And now, of course, things like Gemini have the reassurance, Google's Gemini's got the reassurance that it's not being used to train the model. But when we made this, that didn't exist. And we wanted to let people know that by all means, go off and use ChatGPT. By all means, go and experiment with Bard, Duet, whatever it is you want to play with. But if you're putting something sensitive in that might train the model, use Winnie. The slightly more technical version of that was from my colleague Dan, the Executive Director of Technology. He did a lot of the grunt work, I have to say, on setting this up. I think one of the other things I'd pick out from this is that you need a team of staff to experiment and explore, but also a team of IT people who can pull in different directions whilst also pulling in the same direction, if that's not tautological. But essentially, Dan did a lot of the digging around on forums to try and find out how this would work, because it was all quite experimental. Tim, our new head of IT, here's his diagram, did a lot of the background checks to make sure this was safe and as we wanted it. So this is a slightly more schematic version of that, the approach through Azure AI. But the idea was that, you know, Tim was doing the nuts and bolts. Dan had come up with the idea. We'd got Paul in the team, who's excellent on the architecture side, checking that some of the connections were right and the parameters were completed. And then essentially I was the marketing person. So Dan had the know-how of how to put it together, and then I come along with the how-to, the guide of how to use it. So I think particularly the in tandem operation of the person with the vision, and the people who can build it, and then being able to express it in a way that is meaningful to people, to translate it. I think that was another thing that in reflecting on our journey with AI over the last few months, I thought that's probably a useful thing to mention. I think it does take a village to raise a chatbot. The other big advantage for us, just coming back to that first thing about democratization, obviously, if you're trying to make something freely available, the money coming down to brass tacks, people want to know, particularly at SLT level, how much it costs. And the stat we ran on this back in February, when it was slightly easier to see under the hood of how many conversations there were going on, was 10,000, and it cost us 136 quid. Now, part of that education of staff around AI, I think, is you get a jaw drop moment. Whenever anybody first discovers what it can do to save them time, they go, oh, wow, that's great. I think for management, this is the bit where they get a jaw drop moment. I was exploring with a colleague at another college the other day about a chatbot they've set up for their students. I know it's calling through, not through to ChatGPT, but through to Gemini, through Vertex. And I reckon they're getting that at half that cost. I reckon they've got something like 20,000 conversations for something around 100 quid, possibly even a quarter. So there are ways of doing it which the monetized front sort of shop window models don't necessarily offer. But if you can dig around a little bit and you've got somebody with the prepared to rootle around and see what they can get, you can get this for good money. And I think that's a real appeal to people. Whilst also, I have to say, being mindful of the environmental impact. We don't have the end of the conversation around that. Some people have flagged that it's really bad that the data centers that are churning out this information are problematic in the fact that they are absorbing vast amounts of power. Others will tell you that actually that's completely fallacious and that they've managed to reduce it right down. I think, like anything new, it takes a while for the true data to come out over a period of time as people try and put in parameters and things to reduce the impact of these things. But that's something I certainly and our CEO have got a keen eye on, just what's it costing. I know in the admin console for Google that now you can see what Gemini is doing. You can see amongst various things, what's the environmental impact, and you can see it surge, but it's being aware of it and knowing how to handle it that is certainly something that I'm keen to keep abreast of. So Winnie was essentially at heart a chatbot. It's called ChatGPT for a reason. You chat with it. ChatGPT is fueling Winnie in the background. And then we added something called blob storage. I've learned an awful lot of terms over the last few months. Blob storage apparently is just a completely disorganized folder, like a teenager's bedroom. You can shove anything in and then Winnie will be able to read those policies in this case and course specs. So that's been really useful so that staff can interact with essentially the organization. I was sick a few months ago. I didn't think my boss would thank me for coming in and snivelling over him. So I said into Winnie, I said, what time do I have to let my line manager know I'm sick? And it saved me going through Drive, through a folder, finding the sickness policy, scrolling to page 6, because it came straight up with 7:30 a.m. if you're teaching, 8 a.m. if you're not. And then it gave a footnote reference of where that was. So I could click in and then open the PDF and check it was true. I have to say that the next step, which some of these green illustrations will show you quite how we want to use this, the next step, we are hovering over pressing go. We've been hovering over it for months. And I think that's the next step that everyone's hungry to do, is to interact with data across an organization to reduce that copy and paste. It feels like the sort of Silicon Valley revolution of the 80s is really only culminating now in reducing the human need to go to different windows and different boxes to find information. We really want, or I as a teacher really want, to be able to send a parent report in which, because I've left a comment every week after their lesson, because it knows their attendance, because it knows whether or not they've done their homework, and it's got their mock grade score, and it knows their target grade, can write the first draft for me straight away. Now, obviously, that we're going through multiple extra checks of just quite how much information we want to give it, where the safety boundaries lie on that. We want to make sure the right guardrails are in place. And there are tools that are offering to sit over Google Drive and SharePoint, if you're in a Microsoft world, that will offer to sit over that information and not process it. But they're a bit costly at the minute. And so we're trying to find a way to make that work for us. But this was the sort of dream path line. And essentially this third and fourth circle are pretty much the same thing. Once you're able to send parents course data and attendance, you're at the point where it's pulling in the performance data as well. We've experimented with a new AI feature in our ILP, which is going to be able to summarize comments. We haven't pressed go on it yet, but a lot of that is that cautious optimism. We're trying it. We want to see how it's going, but we're not quite there yet. So at its heart, here it is in action. You type in what you want. You'll all be familiar with how these things work by now. We've actually tarted it up a bit since this. It's slightly prettier and more colourful. I know that Winnie has inspired other organizations that we've spoken to go under the hood and do something similar as well. In fact, I've seen another college have got a great thing where you can attach a document, which is really exciting to see. That at the moment, this is built in Azure AI Studio. Azure AI Studio, I would say, is quite a hostile place to operate. You're very much in the long grass there, and you do want to have some pretty sharp techie elbows with you. I was thrilled to see that Copilot Studio, which I was having a play with my boss yesterday, is a friendlier place to spin up something quite similar to this. And actually, we started looking at that really for a student model. I'll talk more about that later, but I'm really keen to try and put something like this in the hands of students, but having, again, put the right things in place to make sure it's acting as we want. Obviously, we want to know that if a welfare issue comes up, that it's directing people into student services and to the correct people, that it's not hallucinating at a time when we really need solid data. we want to make sure that if a student asks for it to write their essay for them, that it will say, nah, I can help you research. So that's what we're playing with at the minute. But I would recommend to you, if you're in a Microsoft world, that Copilot Studio is probably the next thing to check out. I think it's something like 20,000 conversations for 300 quid a month, 270 quid a month, which is pretty good value. The big thing, I think, from a well-being point of view is the saving time. Different estimates on this. Accenture at the end of last year was saying it would save you 40%. I don't think we're there yet. Different estimates range between 5, 6, 7, 8 hours a week. I have to say, in an industry, particularly FE, where a lot of people feel overworked and overstressed, I think 4/5 say that their workload is too great, and a third are thinking of leaving because of it. I actually think it's quite hard to quantify that time because they're not getting the time back so much as that they're just doing closer to their actual contracted hours. And I had a conversation with a brilliant colleague of mine who's been a real vanguard in using AI in the classroom. And she and I were saying that actually it's changed the quality of time you spend in some cases, rather than necessarily just gifting you back. Managed to mute myself. It might be that you are now still working on a Sunday afternoon, but you are refreshing a lesson that you've taught for 6 years, and it gives you a renewed invigoration for what you're teaching. I was saying to a Landex tech committee earlier on that one of the things I got really excited about was an AQA English language exam text that I was supposed to be delivering with a woman romantically walking down a path with a parasol. I thought, my level 2 carpenters are not going to go for this. This is not going to fly. And I just watched a fairly dreadful film about Godzilla and King Kong, but I thought they'll probably quite like that. And I can show them the trailer, and there's some blood and guts and gore, and they'll find that exciting. So I showed them the trailer, but the night before I'd managed to get Winnie to create me a source, a replacement text, which hit the boxes of the questions that AQA were going to ask them in their English language. We practiced with it. They were on fire. Not only had most of them seen the film in the 3.5 days it had been out, but they recognised it, they were excited by it, and they did the work I needed them to do. And no, I didn't save any time doing that. I actually spent time doing it, but it felt like it was the time I was choosing to spend on something I was then proud to deliver. I got an image out of Firefly, Adobe Firefly, to try and accompany it. So I think sometimes it changes the quality, but undeniably it can lighten the load. I think in terms of planning lessons, differentiating, I think it's a great provocateur for saying, you know, how can I improve this for higher and lower level learners? Yes, it can look at an entire spec. I think most teachers, if you dangle it now as a look, it can plan a lesson for you, will say, I've been planning lessons for many years, thank you. But that's not to say it can't creatively spin up new versions, new approaches to things, and make stuff relatable for students. A colleague of mine in health and social care had great success with a student who'd just been on placement in a care home, and all of the textbook scenarios that she'd got were about a hospital. So she just tweaked it and made it about this 80-year-old gentleman that the girl had been on placement with. And this kid's eyes lit up. And she was like, and the teacher was like, oh, wow, that's great. She's managed to use it to thread lessons, to try and sort of reduce those gaps between curriculum content, where I think it can feel slightly like you're lurching from module to module. I think it's really good at giving a sense of continuity. Obviously, writing reports. You'll be surprised to hear, as I bounce around the place enthusiastically about one of my favourite hot topics, that I like words, but not everyone does. And I know that Lucy, our head of hair and beauty, when we had Nigel, Deputy FE Commissioner, visiting and looking at all of this stuff, he challenged her on the spot and said, how are you using AI? And Lucy looked panicked and was like, she wasn't sure if she was supposed to be using it. And she went, well, I've used it to help me with some emails. And I think a lot of people use it for emails and for report comments, and I think that's okay. I think if you've got the red mist because you've just come out of a lesson and you've had a difficult time with a student, I think managing to couch it in a way that you're happy to click email parent on the ILP is a relief. I think people I'll get off my soapbox in a second, but I think the more that people are able to articulate themselves in an emotionally intelligent way to let themselves be understood, the better. And I think if AI can grease those wheels, more the better. Obviously, supercharging search. I don't use search engines anywhere near as much as I used to. I tend to start with Gemini or with Winnie and type something in and see what it gives me. Obviously, then a little bit like announcing this to staff, I said it's an 80% first draft. You do actually have to put some human actual intelligence into it as well to check it's going the way you want. You can't just put it out there and disown yourself from it. If you're posting it, it is yours. You've got to take responsibility for what's going out there. So I think it's a good first draft of things, and you would want to interrogate the information it gives you out of a search if you. But we were saying earlier that the number of times that you find yourself going through hordes of pages to try and find tech support on something, how do I add an image in Google Slides, perhaps? It can much more quickly give you a step-by-step customized guide for you. Early warning systems for students, we've experimented because, as I say, Winnie's a safe place to splat in a page, a copy, even if we're still at the stage of copy and paste, where you can paste in the a list of students from a class profile and say, identify the ones at risk. We had some success with that where it spotted that because we record dates as numerical values, 1st of November, 8th of November, it clocked that was a Wednesday, which a human might miss, and when this student has a pattern of absences on a Wednesday morning. Now, we might not have clocked that, but then that opens up a question of, are they late because the train is cheaper and there's a bursary issue? Are they a young carer? It could be simply that they don't like maths on a Wednesday morning, but knowing about it to try and spot it. I think we have a lot of data in our colleges, and it's about trying to access and interrogate that data in a meaningful way. In terms of prompting, I'm a huge fan of just chat to it. It's, as I say, it's called ChatGPT for a reason. When I first stuck my neck out and thought this was a good idea to advocate, I felt a bit lonely, and now I'm increasingly discovering that that's the advice that Google give for Gemini. I know the other day I heard somebody saying that 21 words is supposed to be the sweet spot. You can do a big front-loaded prompt that's 3 pages long, and you will get a better result out of it. But I tend to find that it's a slightly scarier, steeper learning curve for people, and that we want to try and make this as easy and accessible as possible. So the way I've taught people is just to try and keep it clear, short and simple, but give anything necessary contextual-wise. So if you wanted to write a lesson plan and you type write a lesson plan, it will. If you tell it it's a 2-hour lesson plan, they're carpenters and they're 17 years old, you're more likely to get something functional out of it. And then I think, so this is an example of what that might look like, but you've obviously got to know what that is before you punch it in. I heard a sort of horror story a few months ago now about this being used with new teachers, and I think demonstrating how anyone can use this, I'm a big advocate for. I think with any of it though, to do that final 20% piece of the jigsaw, people need to be able to understand what they put in and then validate what they get out. So I probably wouldn't start teaching people on our level 5 course by saying, great, jump on in, you don't need to know how lesson plan works. You need to be able to evaluate what comes out. But for prompting, prompt engineering is a word I'm allergic to. It's just chatting. And from my point of view, the more I can upskill our staff to feel confident with this, to use it as their own personal assistant, and I would say this is true of any of our any tech tool, I would hope that translates, and I'm seeing this borne out through to our students' confidence with technical tools. So for them, it can be a personal tutor. And I think if we're able to enable people, educate them, make them feel confident to use a tool, then given that prompting is already on job descriptions and has been for several months, if you've got a student who's capable and confident to use this, they're going to sail into a job. And that's ultimately what it's all about, is equipping them to be the best they can be. And in terms of uses in and beyond the classroom, I'll rattle through these because I'm sure most of you have heard all of these before, but obviously it's great at chunking down massive amounts of texts. That's been useful for our senior leadership team to prepare papers for governors. It's been useful for me when I've been sent an 88-page AI document from the government and been able to squash it down into some bullet points. I've still had to check some of the details in there, but it gives you a quick overview. helping generate ideas if you're tired on a Friday afternoon and that's your lesson planning time. I've mentioned a few of those, but particularly good at analogies and real world links, connecting stuff through to students. And I think when we demonstrate care, this is my educational philosophy, at least pedagogically, if you can demonstrate care to a student, they are much more likely to engage. And I think if you can customize something, you're going to get a response. I had a student who didn't come for the first 2 weeks of term. He's in the classroom now, he's on his phone. I've got him off his phone and listening, and then I had a chat with him at the end of last week. He's completely demoralized. He's failed several times. He hates English. He obviously has a real block, and it's a combination of loss of hope, previous negative experience. But I was chatting to him and I said, look, can you just give me 1 week, just try, so I can see the level you're at. And last week he didn't do the classwork, but he wrote a 3-paragraph letter with great vocabulary, imagining he were a soldier in World War II, home to his lover. Now, firstly, I've never seen him write anything, but secondly, I, with permission, took a photograph of it and said, I'm going to create you a source that you can practice with next week. Now, if I'm honest, I would always have loved to have been able to do that, but I wouldn't have had the time. Now I can put that photo into Winnie and say, or into Gemini and say, write a AQA source that I can use as exam practice. I think it's all about trying to find connections. Now, that's a timely example. I don't have that every week. I'd be lying if I did, if I said I did, but it gives you a flavour of, I think, some of the ways in which it can just help support fatigued teachers. I've seen some brilliant examples of this working in particularly English and history. So I mentioned Richard III, did you kill the princes in the tower? I know that we had some examples of English lit students falling about laughing at all the forsooths it gave when asked to be one of the characters from a Shakespeare play. Equally, writing a poem as Sylvia Plath. I know that Karen, a colleague of mine, brought that in, put it on all the students' desks, said nothing. And they were like, what's this? What's this? And she was like, it's a Plath. And they were like, nah, it's not. And suddenly got a learning exercise because she was like, why don't you think it's Sylvia Plath? And they were looking at the themes and the language, and it's something fresh. She's taught that lesson for years. She didn't need to do that, but it's just something a bit new. Good for marking moderation. I obviously would absolutely shy away from it being the only thing that marks anything, because we want to keep the human in the loop. We don't want AI student work being written by students in AI and then marked by AI. That's a horrible dystopian vision, but I think there's an excellent thing here for particularly smaller teams. Linda, a colleague of mine who teaches on some level 5, level 6 business courses in the evenings with adults, she doesn't cross over with her colleague. There's only 2 of them. And so just to try and get the level and go, why have you said level 2, not level 3? Because they haven't hit the consistency of vocabulary. Okay. Just useful to sound off with, I think. I've used it for spreadsheet formula, and I've seen finance have it open for that as well, just to check where a formula might be going wrong. Translation, I'll talk about again in a second. And I think the more we automate stuff, the better. Being bold with it, I think that's back to that cautious optimism, is just giving it a go. I think there are no experts. Those experts that there are in Silicon Valley, monetizing the heck out of this at high speed. I like to think that I've had some experience with it. I wouldn't go anywhere near saying I was an expert. I've been lucky enough to just sort of in my job to play around with it more than some, I suppose. But there are no experts, and I think knowing that there's no one necessarily to go to and ask, there's not a guaranteed course. We're all in this together, and I think I've been lucky with calls with Sue and Paddy at Jisc to explore some of the ways in which we can help each other. It's how I know Rabina, we've worked together to discover this. I mentioned prompt engineering and my allergy to that term, but I've also learned a heck of a lot from staff coming and sharing things they've discovered with me. I mentioned that it's not always right that we just give these tools to the people who are known for being the tech lovers. I'm a tech lover, but some of the stuff I've learnt most from has been a colleague of mine, Juliana, who is not a tech lover. She's the first to tell you that she's got a 6-year-old phone and she's not interested in how to work on Instagram. But she got into AI because her kids were using it, and then she started getting work from students. And since then, she's learnt how to use it, tailored her classes to fit. She's been demonstrating it in lessons, and then she's been off to other colleges to show them how to use it. It's been a remarkable journey, but it wasn't the person I'd have expected. So that democratization point I would hold fast on. And also, I had a more nervous of using tech colleague at BCA a few weeks ago who said I'd lost confidence in my lesson plans, but I put a lesson plan in and it said I was doing quite well. Now, all right, we know it can be sycophantic and tell you the things it wants, but she said, why, what's right? And it said what she was doing well and suggested a couple of things. We all know it can do that, but I think the takeaway I got from that, and the reason I was excited about it, was I could tell she was losing confidence, and that after 20 years in the profession was starting to question whether she should be there. And I think knowing that actually what she's doing is good practice is really good. And so there's all sorts of things. I've got a student called Letitia who has gone on to do a level 2 business course, as you'll see in a second, from having practiced her interview questions with ChatGPT, and she's gone on to create an entire presentation for her fellow maths haters. Sorry for any maths lovers there, but she didn't like doing maths GCSE last year, but she's put together a presentation on how you can use AI to help tutor you to pass maths, and not to cheat with it. So there's been some incredible stuff I've learned from people, and here are some of them.
Okay, why
Sorry,
I
this is
struggle
quiet.
when I have artificial intelligence, so I just put everything there. How can I link this lesson, the previous lesson, to the today's lesson? And bam, the response came. So again, artificial intelligence is amazing. It's really amazing. I'm so happy that we have the chance to use this system.
I haven't been teaching students AI. I have been teaching students prompts, and they have been teaching me prompts, because they go out and find out something, and then here they come with lots of different prompts. Each little bit that I taught them, they would teach me 3 little bits back, and they ended up teaching me more than I have taught them. All of them, what they've realized, it is not a tool for cheating, but another teacher. So they have somebody, it's almost like a private tutor.
Can you pretend that you are an interviewer and interview me for this business course?
Of course. Let's get started. Can you tell me a bit about why you're interested in pursuing a business course?
I love it. It's just like when any kind of question when it's come to my mind and there is nobody around me, I just ask ChatGPT. ChatGPT is like a friend, a teacher, is like everything for me nowadays.
I love that after that, his course mates all came up, went, oh, and ribbed him about it and gave him a hug. So obviously that just gives a quick flavour of some of the great stuff I've seen going on around college. I think the great takeaway for me from that was we're learning how to use it, not to cheat with it. I remember Bet last year hearing a Microsoft VP on stage saying that she'd heard a student say, how are we supposed to know how to use it when our teachers ban it? And I thought, God, we need to find a way to get it in the classroom to model the correct use of it, because turning it off isn't the answer. And I think where they were cheating with it and were generating content, and Juliana's very forthright and going, I'm not marking that, why should I care about that? AI wrote that. They were like, oh, how did you know? Has opened up that conversation. That Google Doc sharing all the prompts is some great practice there. And they do know how to do it because they've got it in Snapchat. They have to pay to get rid of it in Snapchat. So they have seen it, but if we don't teach them how to use it, they won't know. And so I said, how could I get it to model answering an exam question for us? And they said, well, paste in the source. Okay, now what? Paste in the question. Okay, now what? Well, ask it to answer it. Okay. What do I do? Press return. So they taught me, and then out it came with its answer, and I was able to go through the answer with them, and I was delighted to hear them spot the problems with the answer, because it didn't synthesize A and B into single paragraphs like I teach them they need to. So they were learning from seeing how they could use it. I did a cheat sheet to start with for staff, which I'm thrilled to say no one's looking at anymore, because since April people have got used to, you just chat with it. They don't need these ideas. I know some institutions have had some success with, again, shared Google Docs where you paste in those sort of longer prompts. I think that could be a really nice crutch for people just to get started. But as I say, I think once people have understood that you can interact with the output and say, make it better, make it shorter, 2-hour lesson, not 1-hour lesson, and you don't need to be polite with it. My partner would disagree. She's terribly polite with them. I call it Sheila at home because if I say SIRI, it's going to light up. But you'll all be familiar with that I don't say please. And actually, you can, some research from February, I think it is, shows that you get better outputs if you don't try and tiptoe around the polite P's and Q's. People have got it open. I think increasingly it is just the chatbot part of it is just something that people have open. Winnie's there. I was on a call the other day and saw a colleague who got it lurking in the background. And I think being open and saying that's okay, you're allowed to use it, whether you're staff or students in the correct way is a great thing. There are a few prongs to that cautious optimism. The caution bit being, I think, making ethics clear, consulting people, and giving policies and guidance. And a lot of that is around that teamwork. It's getting people together to discuss it. I've started an AI council with some of my front runners at the vanguard of people who are using it. And that's for us to review the policy, because this ain't a policy that's going to need updating in 2 years. It's going to want looking at every 6 months, to look at how we couch misuse, to look at how we teach the students, never mind the staff. But I think with those three things in play, that cautious optimism means you can afford to press play on using AI in an institution. I'm just going to let this trundle along in the background, but I did a 5-minute video for our new students in tutorial in the first few weeks, just to explain what AI is, how it works, a sort of compressed version of what I'm saying today, really. Here's a bit of the matrix, but just saying how it works, not to be scared of it, but also how they should and shouldn't use it. So some of that is that transparency thing. We want them to be transparent about when they're using it, but equally we need to be transparent about when it's okay. I've seen some brilliant stuff at a couple of colleges that have got a traffic light system. I'm going to run with that idea. It's a really good idea. And we've got some old laminated cards on the wall that say you can and can't use your mobile phone, depending on the point in the lesson that you're running a Kahoot or you want them to pay attention. I think something similar that says, green light for coming up with ideas, but red light for writing your essays for you. So I think some of that's really useful. I then did a Google form quiz rather off the end of this to check people's learning. I've firmly moved the misuse point into plagiarism rather than it being AI, because I think at the beginning I could sense that people branded AI in their head as misuse. And actually, for me, it boils down to the same age-old thing that you clock if you get a suspicion that somebody's mum wrote that, which I have to tell you, in GCSE geography, I was particularly offended that my mate Hugh's mum, who'd got a PhD in geography, wrote his homework and he got away with it. But as a teacher, when something's submitted to you that's not quite right, you get that uncanny valley feeling. There's no difference if AI writes it or the parent writes it. So this is me this is a new poster I've created for students to try and take some of the heat out of that JCQ guidance around AI that makes it look quite evil, but trying to explain what it is to debunk the jargon in it. I think the word authentic I picked to try and ping through. I think that's quite I hope that's a word that 16 to 19-year-olds understand. I've heard them use it in a way of respect and awe. So trying to ping that through and explaining that they can use it so long as they reference it. Again, I've left it open for staff to interpret within their particular areas. HE will differ to schools. And then a flow chart inspired by some of the learnings from Nicola, one of our colleagues in the animal department, about how she approached dealing with it. So I've put some preventative measures at the top, which is largely education and knowing how to use live docs in Google to see the version history, but also then what to do if you do suspect. And there's some reasons there that might twinge, little flags that might go off, and then showing people what to do, because 9 times out of 10 the students hold their hands up and are amazed that you've called them out on it. Fair cop. It's what to do if they then persist in using it on the next draft or flatly deny it. I mentioned I caution against using GPT-0 and turn it in for various reasons, but if people do, it's only one element of an argument that's put to the student. It can't be put through as fact. You want to use their past work. A great bit of practice I learned from a colleague the other day is getting them to do an initial diagnostic at the beginning of the year in class as a piece of work that you then use as a benchmark for their style. I thought that was quite canny. And then obviously the Google Docs history check. But that was a way just to try and reassure people that we know it's happening. But as I've learned through conversations with Jisc, is everyone else, I think at the beginning, at least certainly a year ago, thought that somebody else had the answer and that there was, a sort of mystery silver bullet to fix this. There's not. We've got to sort of find it out together. So happy to share that if it's useful. And that's part of the digital safety message that I've put out to students. There's a lot in this poster that's trying to capture all the different potential safeguarding concerns about not just passwords, but who they meet from an app, what they share, whether or not they're generating content and know that they can't deepfake something, which obviously came into the press in a big way earlier on in the year with the Taylor Swift deepfakes. But this has got a lot in it, but it's part of that. We need to use this in tutorials. So again, this came up in the first few weeks and we'll revisit it in a few weeks' time. I mentioned the Snapchat thing about it being there. So we're at I think, a really exciting point where the final button of automating everything is close, but taking advantage of what is there is something I would strongly recommend. We've run some courses in the summer in our community to try and engage inquisitive business minds around. This was Windsor College. We've experimented, as I mentioned earlier, with trying to get integration in our ILP so that we can summarize comments and get a heat map on a student's attendance and behavior. There's lots of different models out there that you can play with. They do different things, whether or not they do text, and images, whether they do text, images, video, audio. They achieve different things. Winnie is a bit of a flirt. Thankfully, the way Azure AI Studio works, we can plug it into different models. We're not wedded to using GPT 3.5. It just seems to be the fluent and cheapest one for us to use at the moment. I'm quite keen to investigate a couple of these others and indeed explore, like I mentioned, Copilot Studio, but equally building it in Vertex is something I'm keen to have a look at. This isn't a static thing, and I don't think anyone yet has a single product that you can press go on and works everywhere. So there is a little bit of a workshop experiment to this, and keeping abreast of what's out there. A little clue here of what my line manager is particularly keen that we explore next, because of the context length, which is a AI techie way of saying how much information it can remember at a time. Llama's pretty good for that and pretty good value. So we want to really squeeze all we can out of the existing staff model, Winnie. We want to create a student one. We haven't come up with a name for that, but I stole a good idea from Scott Morgan at Bridgend the other day, who suggested that they're running a competition to name that, which I really like. So we'll do a student competition to name that when we've built it. And then also the experience through admissions. You've probably, we've got a big ESOL community, particularly Slough and Langley College. We have a language barrier with our learners who we're trying to help. In many cases, they're refugees. The last thing they need is the stress of not being able to put themselves across in that interview. And with that diverse community, we want to be as welcoming as possible. And whilst Google Translate's been great for at least, a bit of back and forth and making sure you're understood, we found that now actually that multimodal thing, the fact it can take audio and text and process it in a very quick, impressive way, has been great for admissions. So this year we were able to take advantage of it, as I'll show.
Welcome to Langley College. My name is Andrew. Would you like to tell me a bit about yourself?
أهلا بك في كلية لانجلي. اسمي أندرو. هل تود أن تخبرني قليلا عن نفسك؟
اسمي حافظ عبد الرؤوف محمد علي بركة وأتيت من السودان.
Yes, my name is Hafiz Al-Rauf Muhammad Ali Baraka, and I come from Sudan.
Would you like to tell me what kind of courses you're interested in studying at the college?
هل تود أن تخبرني عن الدورات التي تهتم بدراستها في الكلية؟
حاليا أنا أدرس في التعليم اللغة الإنجليزية، ولكن السنة القادمة إن شاء الله أكون أعمل في دراسة أفلام وسياحة وتصوير.
Yes, currently I'm studying English, but next year, God willing, I will be studying film, tourism, and photography.
Fantastic. Let's see if we can help you out.
شكرا لك.
Now, that is not a costly thing to do. That's just me on the ChatGPT app, and I said everything you hear in Arabic, read out loud in English, and everything you hear in English, read back in Arabic. And so that just really helped this season grease the wheels and get people understood, which I think is a really important thing. It's that communications point. So just wrapping up, and I'm sorry I've taken nearly the whole hour. I was thinking, God, I won't need an hour, but this is something I feel so passionately about. And I think to start with, it's leadership. If you're lucky enough to have a chief exec who's up for it, great. If you're not, I think it's about showing them how to do it. And I've talked to Brian at colleague Sergar about ways we can support that. But I think it needs someone to grab the bull by the horns. I think then it's about educating people how it works, not just staff, but students as well, so that people understand what the inputs look like, how it works, so that they're not confused about why Turnitin has reported that there's a 46% likelihood that that student has cheated in a controlled assessment, which I had a few weeks ago. It said that it was AI and the teachers were baffled. Teamwork, I think that the fact that you work together to create it doesn't need a massive team, but it does need some hours set aside to give it a go, whether or not you're researching on the forums, building it or advertising it. And then equally a team of people to have oversight of it, the policies. And then hands-on experience. Nothing beats just giving it a go. I spoke to a college the other day that were itching to use it after we chatted to them about our experience, but they've spent the previous time working on the policies around it. And I think it's quite right to be careful and cautious and put those policies in place. But at some point, you've just got to give it a go. We've got a summit next week, actually, next Friday, that we're running, that Jisc have kindly supported. We've got loads of great stuff coming up in this. If I just zoom in slightly on some of the rundown for the day, we've got Charlotte Briscoe, the digital lead at the DFE, is doing our keynote. We've got Microsoft there. Google Cloud was sponsored by Quizzes, Canva, Verbit, Body Swaps. We've tried to get some vendors there that aren't necessarily the usual people that you see at events. We've got people coming from Wales, Hull, Ireland. We've tried to really bring together people from all around the country, from those pockets of excellence where perhaps regionally they're big players, but if you don't get the train to Hull, you might miss out. We want to bring it all together. Jisc, thankfully, are very kindly supporting. So that's a real way for us to bring together HE, FE and schools to look back at the past year and see what's next. So by all means, sign up for that. I'll pop the link in the chat, and I've left a brief hot second for questions at the end, but thanks very much. It's something I'm enthusiastic about, and so thank you for bearing with and listening.
Thank you so much, Roddy. That was amazing. I'm clapping. Very good.